There's a moment almost everyone has experienced, but rarely admits out loud. You sit down to do the thing you say you love. The writing, the filming, the painting, the business idea, the workout, the dream you swear matters most to you. And suddenly, without warning, everything else in the world becomes urgent. The phone needs checking. The desk needs cleaning. The timing feels off. You'll start tomorrow. Steven Pressfield opens The War of Art by exposing that moment for what it truly is, a battlefield. This book doesn't begin softly. It doesn't encourage or soothe. It grabs you by the collar and says something uncomfortable yet deeply liberating. You are not lazy, broken, or unlucky. You are at war, and the enemy is inside you. Pressfield calls this enemy resistance, and from the very beginning, he makes it clear that resistance is not some vague idea or motivational buzzword. It is a real active force that shows up precisely when you're about to do something meaningful. Resistance doesn't attack tasks that don't matter. It doesn't bother you when you scroll endlessly or distract yourself with harmless busyness. It shows up the moment you try to write a sentence that could change your life, launch a project that scares you, or step into a higher version of yourself. Resistance, Pressfield argues, is proof that the work matters. The stronger the resistance, the more important the calling. As the book unfolds, Pressfield systematically dismantles every excuse we use to avoid our creative and meaningful work. He describes resistance as sneaky, shape-shifting, and infinitely patient. It doesn't always appear as fear. Sometimes it appears as perfectionism, which convinces you that you're just not ready yet. Sometimes it appears as research, preparation, or waiting for inspiration. Sometimes it disguises itself as a victim's story, telling you that the world is unfair, that circumstances are against you, or that someone else has it easier. Pressfield's brutal honesty stings because it rings true. Resistance is not external. It's not your job, your family, your lack of time, or your lack of resources. Resistance is internal sabotage dressed up as logic. One of the most striking ideas Pressfield introduces early on is that resistance is strongest when we are closest to breaking through. The moment you feel the urge to quit, delay, or distract yourself is often the moment you are standing at the edge of growth. Resistance hates momentum, it hates consistency, it hates commitment, and it will do anything to stop you from crossing that invisible line between dreaming and doing. This framing flips the narrative. Instead of seeing fear and discomfort as signs to stop, Pressfield reframes them as signals that you're moving in the right direction. As the book progresses, Pressfield shifts from diagnosing the enemy to prescribing the cure. The cure, he insists, is professionalism, not talent, not passion, not inspiration. Professionalism. This is where The War of Art becomes radically different from most motivational books. Pressfield draws a sharp line between the amateur and the professional. The amateur waits for the mood to strike. The professional shows up regardless. The amateur works when it feels good. The professional works because it's their job. The amateur lets failure define them. The professional understands that failure is part of the process and keeps going anyway. Pressfield's concept of professionalism is not about money or recognition. It's about mindset. A professional takes responsibility for their work. They respect the craft. They understand that resistance never disappears. It must be confronted daily. This idea strips away romantic notions of creativity and replaces them with discipline. Inspiration, Pressfield argues, follows action, not the other way around. You don't wait for the muse, you invite the muse by sitting down and doing the work. One of the most empowering aspects of the book is how Pressfield normalizes fear. He doesn't tell you to eliminate fear. He tells you to expect it. Fear is not the problem. Avoidance is. Fear is simply the price of admission for a meaningful life. The question is not whether you feel afraid, but whether you allow fear to dictate your actions. By showing up consistently, even imperfectly, you weaken resistance's grip. Midway through the book, Pressfield introduces a more spiritual dimension to the struggle. He speaks of the muse not as a mystical being floating in the clouds, but as a force that meets us halfway when we commit to our work. This isn't about religion in a traditional sense, but about surrendering the ego. The ego wants praise, validation, and control. The professional learns to focus on the work itself, trusting that if they show up with humility and discipline, something greater than them can flow through. This shift is subtle, but powerful. Pressfield suggests that when we stop obsessing over outcomes, likes, money, applause, success, and instead devote ourselves fully to the process, the work gains a life of its own. The artist becomes a channel rather than a controller. This perspective relieves pressure. You are no longer responsible for greatness. You are only responsible for effort. Another recurring idea in the book is the danger of identity-based excuses. Pressfield warns against labeling yourself too tightly. Saying, "I'm not a writer," or "I'm not creative," becomes a convenient shield against failure. He challenges readers to stop defining themselves by potential and start defining themselves by action. You are a writer when you write. You are an artist when you create. You are a leader when you lead. Identity follows behavior, not intention. Pressfield also addresses the fear of success, a concept that feels counterintuitive but deeply familiar. Many people, he argues, don't just fear failure. They fear what success would demand of them. Success requires consistency, visibility, responsibility, and change. Resistance exploits this fear by keeping you safely stuck in preparation mode. The dream stays intact because you never test it. Pressfield's message here is confrontational but freeing. At some point, you must choose between protecting your self-image and doing your work. As the book moves toward its conclusion, Pressfield emphasizes that the war against resistance is never fully won. There is no final victory where fear disappears forever. Each day is a new battle. Each project restarts the cycle. This might sound exhausting, but Pressfield presents it as a source of meaning rather than despair. The struggle itself becomes the path. Showing up daily, despite resistance, builds character, resilience, and self-respect. The closing ideas of the War of Art circle back to the central truth introduced at the beginning. The work you are avoiding is the work you are meant to do. Resistance points the way. The professional understands that comfort is the enemy of growth, and that the calling will always demand sacrifice. But that sacrifice is not empty. On the other side of discipline lies freedom. Not freedom from effort, but freedom from self-betrayal. Pressfield leaves the reader with a quiet but powerful challenge. Stop waiting. Stop negotiating with the fear. Stop pretending you don't know what you're meant to do. Sit down. Show up. Do the work. Not because it's easy, not because it guarantees success, but because it's the only way to live honestly. The war may never end, but once you recognize the enemy and commit to the fight, you are no longer a victim. You are a warrior. In the end, The War of Art is not a book about creativity alone. It's about courage, discipline, and integrity. It's about choosing action over excuses and commitment over comfort. Whether you're a writer, entrepreneur, artist, or someone simply trying to become the person you know you could be, Pressfield's message lands with uncompromising clarity. The battle you are fighting is real, and the only way through it is forward.